Welcome to the Tech Ed Podcast, where we visit with leaders who are shaping, innovating, and disrupting technical education. People who are not afraid to think differently, not afraid to try something new, all with the goal of securing the American dream for the next generation of STEM and workforce talent. Welcome into the Tech Ed Podcast. I am your host, Matt Kirkner. It is wonderful to have you with us. You know, a topic that comes up all the time on the Tech Ed Podcast is how do we get more girls? How do we get more women involved in STEM careers? We know that our companies, whether they're a manufacturing company, an industrial company, an energy company, it doesn't matter the space, are better when we have all kinds of diversity, all kinds of thought leadership, all kinds of attitudes and approaches to the way that we go about doing our business. We know that we're better when we have a wide range of perspectives and a wide range of backgrounds, including gender backgrounds. And that is why we're so excited to have our guests with us here today on the Tech Ed Podcast. This is somebody who has lived the whole idea of girls in STEM, women in STEM, becoming an engineer in a marketplace that at least 10, 15, 20 years ago, we didn't see a lot of women in those types of positions, and we're starting to make progress there. We're going to learn a lot about all of these topics today with our guest, who comes to us in the form of Heidi Balestrieri. Heidi is the Director of Engineering for Sentry Equipment. Heidi, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
We're going to have a fascinating conversation. I know that already, and I want to start with this. You know, what inspires a girl as she's growing up to pursue a career in a field like engineering?
What inspired me was I grew up around engineering. I knew a lot of people who were going to school to be engineers and got to go on a lot of manufacturing tours with my dad. And one tour really stood out vividly to me, and that was going to a lawnmower manufacturing plant. I don't even know how old I was at the time, but it was really cool to see them doing testing of lawnmowers to make sure that they were safe and that if something were to hit the blades, it wouldn't go up above your knee when it goes out. So that was what really intrigued me. And I kept going back to that all through high school when I was really trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. And when I said that's what really was interesting to me, my dad says, well, that's what an engineer would do. And so you should really go into engineering.
I love that. So was your dad in the manufacturing space, or did he have a job in that space, or how did this come to be?
So my dad was a professor at North Dakota State University in Fargo. And we would go along on all his student trips. So if he was bringing a group of students to Canada for some conference, the whole family was going with, and we would go on all the tours with them.
Awesome. So this trip to the lawnmower manufacturer, do you recall about what age you were when that inspired you?
It must have been somewhere around that middle school age.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason I asked the question, it was a bit of a loaded question, is because there's a lot of study work that has been done around when individuals choose their career paths, and especially for girls, they will start turning off to certain careers as early as middle school, which is really, and we'll talk about this a little bit more as the conversation goes on, but it really speaks to the importance of inspiring young people when they're in that middle school age as you were. You know, I think back to being about that same age. I think we were 5th or 6th grade, and we took a tour of the Koss headphone manufacturing facility. And I can still remember the top of the headphones that were stainless steel at that time, going through a vibowl, going through a vibratory deburring process. I was, for whatever reason, just fascinated by that. And fast forward like some 15, 20 years later, and I'm the chief executive of a metal finishing operation that had like 30 of those vibowls that were running in the manufacturing plant. And I still think back, that's certainly not the only reason that my interest in manufacturing was sparked. So you're inspired as a middle school student toward this awesome career pathway in engineering. Where does it go from there? So
when I enrolled into NDSU, I enrolled as a general engineering major. I really wasn't sure what type of engineering I wanted to do. So this was a great way for me to be in a class that explored all the different branches of engineering. And it was also a very small class because that's not a path most people take.
Right.
But we had the dean of the engineering college there who was teaching us. And so it was really kind of nice because I got to know him very well. So I had a mentor to really look up to. And through all that, I also do some things I didn't want to do. I didn't want to do egg engineering because a lot of the professors there had seen me in my diapers. And so that was a complete no not something I wanted to do.
Right. Interesting.
So mechanical engineering really intrigued me because of all the different ways you could use it. It's very broad, and you could go into a lot of different industries. You can do a lot of different things: manufacturing, engineering, design engineering, quality engineering, lots of different opportunities there. So that's what really intrigued me. And I decided to go mechanical engineering, and from there did some co-op opportunities at Polaris and Marvin Windows, and decided that design engineering was where I wanted to be.
Got it. So while you're going through your university pathway, how many girls or women were in that program?
So I graduated, I know, with just myself as the lone.
Out of how many would you say?
It was probably about 50 out of mechanical engineering.
So literally like 2% of the entire engineering program were women, and that was you.
Yes.
Huh.
No, I did have other women in different classes. So there were a couple classes where I wasn't the only woman in the class, but when I graduated, that's how it ended up.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, we're making some progress on that, and we still have a long, long, long way to go, but making great progress on STEM and women in STEM, and we'll talk about that. But I want to turn the conversation to Century Equipment, where you are now as Director of Engineering. And, let's start out with, what is that company? What does it do? And then maybe tell us a little bit about your day-to-day role, some of the challenges and problems that you solve, and so on.
Yeah, so Century Equipment is a company that was founded in 1924, and it was basically working in the dairy industry, but it's really grown from that time. We make samplers for different industries: hydrocarbon industry, power plants and hydrocarbon factories, food industry, beverages, a variety of different things, a lot of different industries there. We've also recently acquired 2 companies last year. One company does coolant recycling, so we've started doing coolant recycling, and another one is a wastewater treatment company. So
interesting. Yeah,
getting into a lot of different areas.
Yeah, for sure. So when you say sampling, just give us an example. So you mentioned food and beverage as one of the spaces or verticals that you're in. What are you sampling, and how are you doing that?
So what our equipment does is it goes into your process. So if you're making pet food kibble, and takes a representative sample of that pet food kibble as it's going through the process, and then puts it into a bag or a jar, and then that sample can go and be tested in a lab somewhere else.
Interesting. So it's actually taking a physical sample, and all this, I'm assuming, is in the name of of quality and regulatory compliance and data acquisition and all those things. Am I getting that right?
Yes.
Okay.
So one of our companies that we're working with right now has peanut butter as one of their products, and really wants to make sure that they don't have to do a recall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Super, super important. So and you're doing that, it sounds like, in food and beverage, and then all these other verticals, but the commonality is the sampling. And then into the coolant recycling, is that like machining coolants or manufacturing coolants? Is that space?
Like machining coolants.
Okay.
So they're having, as the coolant is exiting the machine, they're going through a recycling program so that it can be reused and continue to be reused.
Awesome. So let's go into the role as Director of Engineering. What is that role? Who reports to you? What kind of things keep you busy every day?
The role is Director of Engineering, and it has all the engineers ultimately report up through me.
Okay.
Except for a few on the electrical side that report directly to the VP of Engineering.
Got it. So what kind of roles? How many engineers? How does that work?
So we have about 6 engineers,
mm-hmm.
and about 10 to 12 designers.
Okay.
And they are working on custom products. So for like the sampling side of the business, mm-hmm. all of it is custom products for our customers. So it's set up to meet what their needs are.
Interesting. So these are really like customized solutions where you've got a business development person probably that's going out, creating this relationship, finding a problem that you can solve with a customer, and then that comes back to your engineering team, and you're literally like starting from scratch and designing a solution on a custom basis. Is that right? Yeah.
So custom basis. So we have a lot of product lines. So we have a lot of basic models that we can choose from, and then taking those and customizing them for each customer's application.
Fascinating. So what's a typical day of a director of engineering? So let's assume that I'm an 11-year-old girl that happens to be tuning into this podcast because I've sparked this interest in engineering, and here I'm getting to listen to this director of engineering. What do you say to that person about what a typical day is like?
It's never the same.
Right?
It's different every day. It's solving problems, and that's what engineers do, is solve problems, but it's solving a lot of different problems. So maybe not doing as many technical problems, doing a lot more personnel issues and wider company issues that I'm solving.
Yep, absolutely. And so every day is kind of like putting together this puzzle. And so if you're somebody who likes puzzles, likes problem solving, and then likes the satisfaction of knowing that, yeah, I had this really complex issue that I had to figure out, but I managed along with other people to figure it out to solve that problem and move on to the next problem. I'm assuming that's really satisfying for you.
It is. It's really interesting too to be able to do project management on a much larger level. So I did project management as a design engineer, but at a very small level. Now it's doing it across the entire company and figuring out how are we going to integrate this other facility in Utah with our facility in Wisconsin.
Yeah, that's a huge one. And I've been through a few acquisitions and the integration side of it. And it's really, once the deal is done and the papers are signed and the money exchanges hands, that's when the real work begins, right? Because now we've got to figure out, how do I take this culture in Utah and this culture in Wisconsin and two maybe different ways of doing business, and you want to try and leverage as many commonalities as you can to drive some cost out of the model. And that can be a big puzzle in and of itself. So in your role as director of engineering, you actually get into solving those kind of problems as well. So let's go back to kind of the concept of the, whatever we want to call it, the gender gap, or being, one of 50 engineers graduating from this engineering program, getting into the workforce, internships, co-ops, huge Fortune 500 companies in some cases. How did you experience the gender gap, both in education and once you got into the workforce?
I'd say in education, it was a little bit of a shock going from high school to college. In high school, I was taking physics classes, I was taking calculus, and the classes were maybe not 50-50, but it was pretty evenly split, male and female. In college, it was, for my engineering classes at least, it was very predominantly male. And so that was a bit of a culture shock at first, but got through that. And then in the workforce, it was just like even fewer women, I would say.
Right. Okay. So you're one of 50 while you're in the university and in education, and then you get into the workforce, and you're even more limited once you get into the workforce.
So when I first started at my first job after college, I was the only woman in design engineering across 3 product lines.
Wow. Huh.
So that was a very shocking thing. So there were women engineers in manufacturing, but it was a little bit more siloed at that time. So didn't really interact as much with them. Mm-hmm. So it was a little different. There weren't any female leaders that I could see in my direct leadership line.
Yeah, and that's so important, right? Is to be able to look at somebody and say, "Hey, I could have a job like theirs. I could be somebody in a role like that." And he really didn't have, at least from a gender standpoint, that kind of an example or that kind of a mentor that was set for you. Is it intimidating? Is it, is that like a challenge? How do you think through something like that? Is that, tell us about that.
It was definitely a challenge, but I took it as a challenge too. Like, okay, so there isn't anybody,
right?
But maybe I could be that person.
You've got something to prove. Yeah. It's awesome.
But I'd also say that it was also a little isolating. So you didn't have that person to talk to that's like, oh, you had a similar experience that I did.
Right.
But I found that through Society of Women Engineers. Awesome. I was able to get into the section there in Iowa where I was at the time, and really had a community there that I could talk to about feeling isolated, sure, about what was going on.
Was that pretty normal and common when you would sit down with other women that were in similar roles in different companies? Did you find that they kind of looked at it and had the same experience that you did?
Yeah, we all had the same experience. It was pretty interesting. I think there were some people that were a little older, so they had even worse experiences than we did, sure, and that was eye-opening as well. Just finding out that they didn't maybe have a bathroom for women, wow, in their facility when they first started in the 80s or 90s.
It's hard to believe that, right? I mean, I know that's true, but it's just hard to think about a world of, industry or manufacturing or what have you, where you don't have those. And so, where you don't have things as simple as a women's bathroom in the facility. That's just absolutely crazy. We've come a long way. We still have a long way to go. But now you're in this position where you can look back on that experience and say, how can I change that experience for maybe a girl that's going through high school, or a young woman who's considering career options, people coming out of engineering programs and into the workforce. So at Century Equipment, tell me a little bit about how you think about, for instance, onboarding new female engineers. I mean, do you have a concerted effort to recruit females into the engineering team? And if so, once you have them and they're interested, what is their experience like as they're being onboarded? And how did your experience growing up in a world that was much different, even 15, 20 years ago? How does that affect the work that you do now?
Great question. So we are trying to find more women to bring into our group. So right now we have 4 women, including myself, in the engineering group at Century. So one of the things that we're doing is making sure when we're going to career fairs that we have a diverse career fair representation there, that there's women, men, other minorities. We have a diverse group of people, and we're doing that with interviews too, making sure we have a diverse interview pool as well. So for onboarding, one of the things that we make sure that we're doing is giving all of our co-ops or interns or new employees real projects, real engineering projects to work on. Okay. And I think that's a real benefit. I was talking to one of our engineers who's started off as a co-op, and I was her first supervisor at Century as a co-op. And she said that talking to her peers, a lot of them didn't get real engineering projects to work on. They were getting a lot of clerical work. They were getting, very low level work. And she said she was kind of the oddity in having a real engineering project. And she said it was really, it was meaty. It had a lot of things to look into, work and research. And that was the difference. And that's one of the reasons why she came on as a full-time employee, was because of that experience as a co-op.
Huh, fascinating. So in how long ago was she a co-op?
4 years ago.
Yeah, so as recently as 4 years ago, her colleagues or her contemporaries, as they were going through a program, were getting these internships and just doing clerical work or filing or what have you. Got the office experience, got to understand the culture of the organization a little bit, but weren't actually working on real engineering projects. And so what kind of a project would a co-op work on as an example when they're going through that path?
Well, what she was working on was a ER probe. So it's a electrical resistivity probe. So it's measuring the electrical resistance in a pipeline and to determine if the pipeline is starting to corrode or not. So she was really given it and said, here, figure this out. This is what we want to do. How should we design it? What do we need to do? How should we do the wiring? So she's a mechanical engineer, but we're asking her to do electrical engineering research. Right. So
absolutely. Well, there's a lot of convergences in those disciplines as well. And so certainly now in this day and age, we see more and more where mechanical engineers need to have an understanding of electrical systems and electrical engineers, mechanical and vice versa. And as I'm thinking about this, so the project is she's got these 2 probes, the electrical conductivity of metal changes if there's corrosion. And so we're testing resistance between those 2 points of contact. And she's actually helping develop a solution like that. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's 1 probe. So it was 1 probe going into the pipeline, and it's taking measurements at 2 different areas and seeing what the corrosion is for that coupon that's made out of the same material as the pipeline. Okay. So it's measuring what the corrosion of that is to predict what the corrosion of the pipeline is.
So this is a student was she still a college student when
she was still a college student? I think she was a sophomore.
And that hands-on experience of working on a real engineering program or project is what inspired her toward the career that she's in now. So now she's on your team. As she's coming on as a full-time employee, how does that onboarding process feel?
So it was very easy because she'd been there for, I think, 4 semesters. Okay. So it was very easy to come back in and just like pick up where she left off. But we gave her a new project, so new projects, and she's in a engineering pathways program. So we're doing rotational through different engineering disciplines within Century. So she was a designer first. So really just doing drawing work, getting her work checked by somebody else so that she can learn how to do that, so she can check drawings in the future. And then now she's in the design engineering role. So she's got a project. She's actually working on clarifier drives for our newly acquired company, for one that's going up in Canada and brand new. And so she got kind of thrown into it and said, here, design this brand new clarifier for them.
Yeah. And 4 years on from a co-op and now a full-time employee, designing a solution for a customer, getting all that autonomy, all that, a lot of times we don't think of engineering roles as being creative, but there's a tremendous amount of creativity that goes into thinking through how we solve that problem and how we implement a solution. So really, really cool. I'm sure, without asking her, that she would point to you as somebody who is an inspiration, somebody who is a role model. And I think that kind of leads into the next conversation, which was a huge accolade that you received recently, and that is being a recipient of the Manufacturing Institute's 2023 Women Make Award. So first of all, congratulations. That is absolutely awesome. Tell us a little bit about that award and about your feelings as it relates to being recognized in this incredible way.
Well, thank you. It was a great honor to be chosen as one of the honorees. It's an award given to women in manufacturing who demonstrate excellence and leadership in their careers.
Okay.
And a commitment to promoting STEM opportunities for other women. So it's women in all forms of manufacturing. So somebody on the shop floor could be honored. We had CEOs and plant managers being honored, and it was amazing to be part of that group of women.
Absolutely. Is this something you're nominated for, or how do you become eligible for this?
So you're nominated for the award, and then they said from thousands of applications, They choose 100.
Wow. Huh. That's an incredible honor. That's really, really cool. Do you know what kind of things were maybe suggested about your experience and your impact that had an influence on being selected?
So part of it is the leadership that I've showed at Sentry and in bringing in more women into the organization, and also the outreach that I'm very passionate about, bringing STEM to young girls and women.
Absolutely. That's awesome. And that's frankly what we're all about here on the Tech Ed podcast. So it absolutely warms my heart to hear that you were recognized in that way and that you're doing that kind of work. Now, this isn't just an award that like shows up in a box at the door and you get to put it on your shelf in your office. You get to go to this award event that's called the Women Make Awards. So tell us about that experience. Where was it and what was that experience like?
The Women Make Awards took place in Washington, D.C. in a very, very posh hotel that
awesome.
I probably would have never gone to otherwise.
So cool.
So there was a 2-day leadership before the actual awards ceremony. So we did leadership activities, learning about psychological safety, emotional IQ, personal branding. We had women leaders from different organizations talk to us about their experiences, and really, it was a networking opportunity to meet with other women leaders who are just as excellent or if more excellent than I am, and sharing experiences, which is really important.
Yeah, I've got to imagine you found that incredibly inspiring. And did you come out of that event and be like all energized and excited? Yeah,
very much so. It was an amazing event. And then the actual award ceremony was held in the National Building Museum in Washington, D.C., which I found out afterwards has been the host to inauguration balls.
No way. Wow. So here you are like receiving this award in the same space that they've had celebrations of inaugurations. I mean, that had to be just absolutely incredible in our nation's capital and the birthplace of freedom. And I mean, that just had to be an incredible experience.
It was, and I've never been to Washington, D.C. before this either. So this was an opportunity. I was the only one in my immediate family who had never been. So.
Okay. Yeah, well, and what a great opportunity and what a great reason to go, right, to receive this award. I'm sure your family was incredibly proud of you as well. So tell us a little bit about what you learned. I mean, is there like one big takeaway that you had from being there that really stuck with you?
I think there's a lot of different takeaways that really stuck with me. I think two that come to mind right away are negotiation skills. So had negotiation talks before, but this one, it really struck me in a little bit of a different way of talking about asking a lot of questions during a negotiation and finding out what the other person really is needing. So that was really beneficial to me personally. The other one was talking about having your personal board of directors and who's on that personal board of directors and coming up with that list and why it's important to have a personal board of directors.
For sure. Yeah. And I've heard that. I mean, and for our listeners who haven't been, familiar with that concept, having these people that you surround yourself with that really, as I've understood it, represent a variety of viewpoints and backgrounds and really help you think through, decisions, whether it's a career decision, a business decision. I remember when we were selling our manufacturing company now some 6 or 7 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, having 3 people that I surrounded myself with intentionally for 3 different reasons. One had kind of a really big picture transactional experience. Another one was an entrepreneur. Another one was somebody who had recently sold the company, and being advised by those individuals. And it's also interesting how many people join us on the podcast and talk about the importance of having mentors and having other people to help you walk through problems and think through problems. So you don't have to tell us who, but have you come up with your personal board of directors yet?
Yeah, one of the activities there was to come up with that list of people. So in different, like you said, they have different roles. So people in different roles, people who are going to tell you the truth no matter what, and people who you can tell everything to that
Absolutely.
are a safe space. So.
Yeah, for sure. That vulnerability is so important to be able to really lay it all out there. And we can't always do that, especially in a position of leadership. You're always a little bit guarded about, I don't want to dump every challenge or every doubt that I have on the team, because now they're going to share all those challenges and doubts. And sometimes I just have to work through those myself, and having, whether it's an outside board or a group that you're a member of, or this ad hoc group that you put together yourself to be able to bounce those things off of is really comforting, and I think makes us much, much better leaders. So awesome that you were recognized in this way. Did you ever think that you would receive an award like that?
No, yeah. I had no idea. This was pretty amazing.
Absolutely. It's so incredible. And you mentioned that, two of the reasons, one is the pathways that you've created and opportunities you've created at Century Equipment. The other one is your outreach to girls in STEM. So let's talk about that. I know that's a passion of yours and something that really drives you. Tell us about the efforts that you're making to get more girls and young women excited about the kind of career that you've had.
So I do a lot of different outreach activities, going to Girl Scout events and holding activity badge days, engineering badge days, introduce a girl to engineering activities. Mm-hmm. That's something that I'm very passionate about. Working with First Lego League teams. I was a coach for a number of years for Lego League teams.
Yeah, awesome.
Going to big like Discovery World's Girls in STEM event and different STEM expos or STEAM expos at elementary schools and middle schools, just to do hands-on activities around engineering with girls.
Awesome. I mean, it's a wide variety of activities, a wide variety of girls that you're able to engage with. When you sit down and have those interactions, and obviously it's around a project or it's around coaching a First Lego League team or what have you, what kind of things do you share with these girls, and what kind of paradigms or maybe misconceptions do you hear from them about opportunities in STEM?
So I think one thing that is a big misconception is that you have to know all the answers and you have to get it right the first time.
Right. Yeah.
I was just with a group of elementary students at the end of May, and the number of them that were like, "Oh, it didn't work on the first time." Like, nothing works on the first time.
Yeah. Welcome to life, right?
You got to keep trying. You got to keep going through the engineering design process and test and validate and go back and redesign and start all over again.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So yeah, part of, having worked in manufacturing all those years, something you just get used to, right? And even in other businesses that we're involved in, letting people know that it's okay to fail. It's not okay not to try. And we have to push ourselves a little bit, and we're gonna fail at certain things, and we'll come back and figure it out. So that is a really, really interesting perception that you're hearing from these girls as they're considering their opportunities in STEM. Other hurdles that you hear from them or reasons that they might not consider a career in STEM that come to mind, Heidi?
I just think that there's a lot of different, thinking that they're not good enough at math, not good enough at science, that they need to do, they need to be perfect.
Right.
I mean, it kind of goes back to that not being able to fail. I mean, it's that feeling that they're not good enough.
Yep, absolutely. And as we know, and I've worked around all kinds of engineers, and certainly some women and men, more so men, of course. But, the truth of the matter is that there's a lot of folks that were maybe average to slightly above average students in things like calculus and physics, but they're really good problem solvers, or they're really, really tenacious in terms of going after what's been put in front of them, or they're super goal oriented and they're just not going to let anything stand in their way. And you can be, and speaking as somebody who wasn't a great math student when I was going through high school, you can find a way to be a decent problem solver and have a really, really cool career in spite of that, if you recognize that this is an opportunity for you. So those are just some of the things that we have to do to continue to kind of close the gender gap in engineering and STEM careers. What do you think we need to get right, Heidi, in K-12 education in order to continue to encourage that?
I think there's a variety of things. I think the one thing that I've found that has been really helpful is Project Lead the Way programs.
Absolutely.
I think that's very, very good for tying what they're doing in math and science to actual careers in the real world.
Absolutely.
I have two children of my own, and both of them don't like doing worksheets.
Right. Yep. Exactly. And I think if we continue to move education in that direction, PLTW being a good example, and then in my opinion, layering on top of that some really cool hands-on experiences that relate directly to careers in industry and manufacturing, so we can have students engaging with the kind of equipment that they're going to see when they get to manufacturing and understand whether that's a career that they would want. So lots of good things that we can do at the K-12 level. How about at the corporate level? You've had all this experience, companies like John Deere and Polaris and Marvin, and certainly now Century Equipment. So you've seen a lot of things that can work, and I'm sure you've had plenty of time to think about that. What do we need to do at the corporate level or at the company level to continue to encourage women and girls to consider these kinds of careers?
I think company culture is really important. If we don't have a good company culture that is inclusive of women, they're not going to stay. I've been in groups in organizations where the culture was really great. Same organization, different group. Culture was really bad. I didn't feel comfortable. I didn't want to be in that group anymore.
How does the kind of inclusive culture that you're describing that would make a woman feel comfortable in a previously male-dominated career path, what does that culture feel like? What do companies need to do?
It's having a culture where people want to be there and where they don't feel excluded. I felt very excluded in the one group I was in because it was a lot of, I would call it locker room talk.
Okay, yeah, right.
That just shouldn't be happening. So it's just being professional in one way. I'd say the other things are flexibility, offering flexibility. I think that's huge. I've unfortunately had the you're missing too much work because your kids are sick.
Yeah, right.
Discussion before, and that's not fun.
Right,
it's
no,
not
for sure.
And it's something that my mother-in-law went through too, and she was talking about it, and she said, "I will help you out in any way I can because I know what you're going through."
Right.
But we shouldn't have to put anybody, men or women, in that position. It should be flexibility in the workplace for that.
Absolutely.
I think that having good maternity, paternity leave, having those mothers' rooms that are available if you need them. One of the things that we talked about at the Make Awards was having daycare, company-sponsored daycare, because they couldn't get enough workers because the workers needed childcare.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. Those are all great examples. And you think about and I think companies are waking up to that, right? The more flexibility that we can provide an employee, the better off. And to your point, male or female, the more likely they're going to be to stick around, the more loyal they're going to be to the company, the more they're going to feel appreciated. All those things are really, really important. So you've had all this experience, gender in the workplace, gender in education, multiple different companies, spending time in Washington, D.C., learning what other organizations are doing. I think you can be a pessimist when it comes to the future opportunities of women in STEM careers, or you can be an optimist. Where do you kind of fall?
I'm fully in the optimist point of view. I think that we've come a long ways. We still have a long ways to go, but we've come a long ways. I think when I first entered, and I was the only one in my graduating class, to I had six or 7 years ago, an intern who came in, and I took her to one of the meetings I was going to, and she looked around and she's like, "If I wasn't here, you'd be the only woman in here."
Yeah.
Like, yeah, so.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
But she came from a class in her college where there were a lot more women. And so it was a little bit, it's changed so much.
Yep, absolutely. That's really, really encouraging. So you're way more of an optimist than a pessimist. We still have a lot of work to do, and we're certainly not there yet, but we're moving in the right direction, and we're going to continue moving in the right direction. So one last question for Heidi Balestrieri, as we're having a really fascinating conversation around women in STEM, inspiring girls toward really, really cool careers. She, of course, is the director of engineering at Century Equipment. This is a question we love asking our guests here on the Tech Ed Podcast, Heidi. And we're going to go all the way back in time, before the career now, before the co-ops, before the engineering degree. You're a 15-year-old girl in West Fargo, North Dakota, going to high school, maybe a sophomore in high school. If you could give Heidi one piece of advice, what's that advice going to be?
So I think the advice I would give myself would be to not stress out over decisions as much and use the 10-10-10 rule.
Oh, tell us about that.
So if you're really struggling with decisions, think about what you're going to feel like after making that decision in 10 minutes, 10 months, and 10 years. If it's a decision that is probably not going to matter in 10 months or 10 years, then stop stressing about it. Just make a decision and go on. If it's something that is going to affect you in 10 months or 10 years, then think about how it's going to affect you and what the different decision options you have, how those effects will be in 10 months, 10 years, and even 10 minutes.
Wow, that's awesome. We've had a lot of great advice that's come across the line here on the Tech Ed podcast when we have questions like that. That's the first 10-10-10 rule that we've heard, and I love that, and it's a great way to think about future decisions, and I think that's going to really resonate with our audience, as is this entire episode. We've had just a great conversation, Heidi. Wonderful getting to know you. You are a genuine leader. Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of bravery and confidence that goes into the work that you're doing. It's awesome that you've been recognized and awarded in the way that you have as a result of all that work. And I know that you're going to continue to be an incredible advocate for girls and women in STEM careers, and I'm looking forward to the future.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. If you haven't already, subscribe, leave a review, and if you liked this episode, share it with a friend. New episodes launch every Tuesday, so listen in next week.